Everybody say love pink. Hey y'all, it's me, Busback Mountain, and welcome back to Hot or Hot. And today we'll be discussing the train wreck that is RuPaul's Drag Race Global All-Stars. Which I say, by the way, not to criticize the genuinely talented queens on this season, but rather the continued series of confusing choices made by production, which have resulted in yet another confusing batch of placements reeking of favoritism. In today's episode of RuPaul's Drag Race Global All-Stars, our 11 remaining global superstars split themselves into groups and were challenged to come up with lyrics and choreography to different international mixes of Say Love. And the runway category was Color My World, where they were asked to show at least 2 different reveals. So we'll be going queen by queen to break all that down, plus discussing the Nehellenia versus everybody else drama that transpired in this episode's Untucked. And first up, we've got So Muse from Queen Kong's group, who've called themselves Divibe, and are performing to the Latinx mix of the Say Love track. And Soa's lyrics, mostly in French, are really great in the sense they speak to this idea of chosen family and invites all those lonely hearts out there to listen to her melody to feel some comfort and secureness in their home. I think lyrically, she definitely nailed the brief of the song, and she did a decent job choreographically speaking, but my critique of this group as a whole really is that all 3 of them were kind of just on their own Divibe. Not one of them was in sync with another, and I was missing a little bit of synchronicity between even these 2 powerhouses. And this was an issue especially for this group and how they did their blocking on the stage, because a lot of their choreo was performed extremely close together, which made this desire to stand out, I think, in queens like Soa ultimately just look a bit messy. But overall, I give her performance a safe hot. Over on the runway, this was a really great night for her though. This first look is so hauntingly beautiful. She comes out in this giant golden, super gorgeous mask piece that's sad and dark, which she says is an homage to the Ghost of Opera. It tears away to reveal another character from this opera, which is Valkyrie, the opera singer. And this silhouette with that armor piece is just so strong. And the costuming between that first and second piece and the link and the storytelling between them, just again, so hauntingly beautiful. But she really lost me on this third look, because when she reveals from the Valkyrie look to the final one, it's like a pink catsuit, which has some really interesting, like molten almost kind of details on it, but how it was connected to those first 2 pieces, I truly couldn't tell you. She describes the third look as being an homage to her best friend Nina, who has really gorgeous rainbow hair, which she's also wearing. And either her explanation of how this third look tied into the first 2 did not make it into the edit, or she just never said, but it was confusing to me as a viewer. But because those first 2 looks were so amazing, this package overall is gonna be a hot for me. And next to the leader of Divibe, we've got Queen Kong, who is honestly an absolute powerhouse on this stage. And she not only delivers in this really strong, empowering choreo, but also has some great lyrics that tap into this idea of loving yourself and others in her verse. Talking about how when she looks in the mirror, there's so much to love, my body, my heart, and of course, her tight poom poom. And it was clear she knew what she was doing and where she was going in every beat of this track, which didn't surprise me because she was the choreographer of her group. But I did have to stop and ask myself, why was it that her 2 partners in this group were so seemingly out of sync with what Queen was doing? Because as the group leader, it seems like maybe she could have done a better job at assessing the needs of her partners here and scaling back some of the intensity of the choreo, and also coming up with some better ways to separate the girls across the stage and use more of that stage, because with all of them so close together for so much of the performance, it just again added to that messiness overall. But what Queen did from a solo perspective was absolutely amazing, and she killed it. It was hot. But over on the runway, everybody say love pink. She comes out in a big pink furry coat and hat, which is, I think, interesting enough in and of itself. And that coat comes off to reveal a green schmuck over a black bodysuit, and on that black bodysuit we see her name, Queen Kong. And then she pulls out a can of spray paint at the end after she does all her reveals and starts spray painting the crown and spray painting circles onto her chest. And my question after seeing all of this was just like, why? What are we looking at? And thematically, how are all 3 of these looks connected? I still don't know. The only clear inspiration I can see in these 3 looks is a loose Club Kid reference with this torn face kini that she kind of half committed to, and then that spiky crown on top of her head. But I think she got a little too lost in trying to serve abstract art house Club Kid realness, and instead missed finding some sort of thematic link between these looks, and she kind of missed the mark here. This is gonna be a rot for me. And after this episode aired, Queen was was quick to let everybody know that she's not necessarily been feeling the love from the fan base online and had this to say on her X profile. Before you all start up again, I'll beat you to it. Here's me sitting waiting for you all to tell me I'm mediocre at drag, not talented enough, favored by Ru, chubby, manly, overconfident, rude, and should have been in the bottom again because I don't deserve to be in the top. And go. But I'm bringing this tweet up in this video just to remind y'all to send some love to these queens and appreciation for bringing their drag to television and giving us a show. And to remind you all about like opinions on the TV show and the performances the queens give are fun to have and discuss, but it stops being fun for everyone when it gets to a super negative space. So that's my soapbox for the day, and let's move on to Pythia, who is the last girl in Queen Kong's group, and she uses her verse to sing about how she finds strength through her inner queerness, which I think is a lovely message and pairs well with her two partners here. However, there was a huge missed opportunity on either her or the producer's part to make this verse a little bit bigger than life, because her verse was one of those that just kind of sounded like it was recorded in a room and then slapped into the track. There was no auto-tune help, there was no harmonizing with her own voice, which would have been issues with audio engineering, but there's also the possibility that she just didn't give them a lot to work with in terms of inflections and modulating her own voice. Like, for example, Queen Kong did with going from that deep to higher voice in her verse. But the bigger issue with Pythia's performance in this challenge was, yes, she has 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 left feet and did not take to the choreo that Queen was trying to teach her. And so we've got Queen absolutely nailing everything about this challenge, Soa fighting, I think, for her own spotlight against Queen instead of working with her, and then Pythia finally just kind of generally looking confused and a little lost throughout the segment. And so for all of those reasons, I'm gonna give this performance a Pythia, though, apparently is not agreeing with the judges, other queens, and even fan reactions to this episode, because after it aired on X, she posted this to her profile. Wait, watching the episode now, I don't know why I was so disappointed. They're referencing later in the episode when she cries during Untucked because she thought she did really bad. ... Call me Delulu, but I literally didn't do that bad. LOL, whatever, I messed up the last part in my dance with Soa, which was part of the dumb white girl dancing to reggaeton trying to steal the spotlight character. Whatever emoji. But over on the runway, we are once again blessed to have the creative mind of Pythia on stage for us to enjoy, because this was a buffet of treats. The first look is giving monster under the bed realness in a flesh-toned quilted fabric, no less, with arms and legs and mouths and eyes all over it. And that comes off to reveal a really beautiful interpretation of the Mati, which is like the evil eye in her Grecian culture, which she has replicated throughout the look and created some gorgeous crocheted abstract art with, all in different shades of blue. And this finally strips away to reveal what she describes as a combination of everything that makes her her. And we see this gorgeous patchwork of patterns, textures, colors. And I'm seeing those campy, cartoony horror references here too, like with the stripes, I'm getting Beetlejuice, and those different patchwork details giving Corpse Bride. And I've just gotta say, these 3 looks as a package, my God, what a fresh, unique, and fun take on what drag is and can be. Pythia, these looks are an absolute serve. They're so hot. And next up from Miranda's group, Fresh Meat, performing the K-pop mix, we've got Alyssa Edwards, who I think was maybe the queen most excited for this challenge tonight because she gets to play dance mom mother, teaching the different girls choreography and dance moves, and yeah, she was having a lot of fun here. But for as good as a dancer and teacher she is, I'm not sure it really all came together in the end there. However, I think she does deserve a lot of credit for coming up with some pretty good choreo, because even if her group wasn't executing on every hit and move and block, it definitely felt in the essence of what I've seen from some of the crazy dance moves in K-pop music videos. I think it would be fair though to critique her verse as maybe a little too simple. It speaks to a lightheartedness and love that she has for the art of drag. And then although Alyssa on her own did good, I've got that same critique or question that I had for Queen as the choreographer of the group. Could she have taken this even a step back further and slowed it down even more to have her group be in total synchronicity? And I'm gonna give Alyssa a haunt here, but you can also very clearly hear that favoritism in the audio engineering of her verse, because they layered her singing her track 2 different times so you could hear a little bit of harmonizing between what she was singing. It's just those little things that they're doing here to push their favorites to the front. Smells like favoritism to me, mama. And over on the runway, Alyssa comes out in something big, bold, bright, and kind of beautiful. It's giving me like Baby in the Sun in the Teletubby show. And I do enjoy the camp and ridiculousness of this, and the sequencing work is pretty enough here. And that reveals to a moon costume, which reveals to a star dance costume. And I'll say the sun look was probably the strongest of these three. The moon one is the weakest, with that moon being a little misshapen. But she met the brief, had a concept, and made me laugh with the first look, so I'm gonna give this runway a safe hot. Next up is the Kween, who in the challenge uses her verse to sing about her love for her rice and her drag, and talks about how she's an opulent beast. And Eva was someone who tonight really, I think, just kind of faded into the background, which wasn't a good or bad thing. She gave a very safe performance, did the choreo fine, and sang her verse well. This was a safe hop for me. But over on the runway, I had a little more fun with her. She gave us 3 different evil queens from the Disney franchise, first serving Maleficent, and then revealing to the evil queen from Sleeping Beauty, and then finally Cruella de Vil in her red gown from, I think, the live action specifically and not the cartoon. And thematically, I thought this was such a fun runway because it ties back into her drag name, Evil Queen, which is a pun on Evil Queen. And I'll say the reveals were solid. There was no obvious place that they were all coming from. And while the designs and silhouettes were relatively simple, I was impressed how she was able to serve 3 completely different characters and silhouettes across this package, so this was totally hot for me. And next up is Miranda, Lebrao from Brazil, who in the challenge ties some really interesting lyrics together, starting off singing about a million broken little pieces representing herself and all the different aspects which make up her drag, and tying that all together with finding love for what she sees in the mirror. But unfortunately, her verse was another one tonight that sounded like it was sung into a dark alleyway and recorded with a Motorola Razr. Like, there was just not any help in the audio engineering room to be had for Miss Miranda, which again, not surprising since I think the narrative they wanted to push here was that she needed to be in Varo. And while her dancing abilities really made her stick out in this group in some of the worst ways, I think it was clear she was trying and giving it her all. And I think it's worth mentioning dealing with a chronic illness that causes her pain when her body has to move a lot and in certain ways. And considering her limitations, I think some simpler choreo could have been the smart move for her, because as it was presented, it was a And over on the runway, things are not really getting a lot better for her this week. She's kind of giving us like gender reveal party realness with these 3 looks. The first is, in her words, little boy in blue dress playing soccer, and she's holding a soccer ball, which reveals to, I guess, her interpretation of like a little girl playing with her dolly. They're like juxtaposing society's traditional ideas of what a boy is and what a girl is, and the things they should be playing with. And I think her third look was an attempt to smash those traditional societal values of what a boy is and what a girl is by revealing into a non-binary flag dress. And yes, I think this thematic execution of her concept was good, and the messaging is solid. But the actual looks were just not executed at, I think, the level they needed to execute at on the Drag Race runway. Because the silhouettes of the first 2 was giving me like Real Housewives into Little House on the Prairie, into loosely Cinderella meets 1950s housewife, in a dress material, which I think is that actual flag polyester material that you would have on a flagpole, which unfortunately shows a lot of wrinkles on this runway, and it just, I don't think was the right choice here. So this is a case of, yeah, concept good, execution kind of bad. I'm gonna give this a And next up, it's Tessa T, who in the challenge was very entertaining, I must say. In her solo number, she was one of the few in this group to give me a good laugh when she talked about like being low or on the ground, and then she literally falls to the ground and sits there for a second while she sings. And I love that rapped couplet she had in her verse, where she was saying something to the effect of, with Tessa, it gets better, sharper than an army knife, all in German, which then switches to English to finish the rhyme with step up, show up for yourself, even if you embarrass ya, which I know there sounds very jumbled and weird, but the way she did it across the 2 languages was very impressive. But aside from what was happening in her solo segment, she struggled with that group choreo a lot. She was one of those that was honestly as out of sync as much as Miranda was tonight. I think she was able to layer comedy into some of her mistakes that made it a little more enjoyable. And so I'd give what she did overall a warming up. But over on the runway, she gagged me more than just a little bit for sure. She nails a silhouette. And all 3 of these, I mean, just absolutely knows how to serve these looks. The first is this pink, frilly, court jester kind of clown. And the second reveals to the sexy blue clown, which has one of the coolest reveals across all of the queens tonight, because she like pulls on a string somewhere in the middle of her outfit in this blue one to finally reveal to the yellow and orange harlequin print clown outfit, which with the chaps, the shoe covers, the little necklace thing, everything is just so fun. And dare I say fashion? I love the story she told. I love how she tied everything in with her makeup, and I think she is one to watch on the runway. These looks were so hot. And next we've got Nehellenia from Vanity's group, the Backdoor Gals, singing the Europop Europop mix of this Say Love track. And Nehellenia opens up her group's number with a verse about her favorite cartoons and anime shows, including Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Pikachu from Pokemon. And I've got to say, points for creativity and originality here, because I don't think we've ever heard actual big copyrighted, trademarked names used in verses like this, which was shocking. I think that they allowed her to actually do that. But also really just a lot of fun, because who doesn't love Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Pokemon? And originally I was listening to this like, why the hell is she talking about cartoons? But Rupaul in the brief did say, write a verse about someone or something you love. And for her, it was cartoons. So she was technically on brief. The only critique I can give her verse was she tries to tie her love for cartoons back into like sending these other bitches home at the end of her verse, which was a connection point I wasn't seeing here, because that wasn't really the point of this like everybody say love song. But overall, aside from just the lyrics, she nailed the performance. She's so charismatic on stage, and not only was good in the choreo of her solo performance, but also in those larger group segments. She was so on point at every single beat. And obviously I thought this performance was hot. And over on the runway, grab your snorkeling gear, because we're getting in the water. First off, she gives us this beautiful frilly coral reef fantasy, which reveals into a jellyfish look, which reveals into a fish called the blue tang, which is the dory fish from Finding Nemo, which reveals finally into the clownfish, aka Nemo. And oh my god, wow, across the board, like what a great story she told here. What a fun adventure she took us on, and what beautiful garments she wore on the runway to do all of that. She truly gave us 4 completely different looks that had a thematic tie-in that were all individually gorgeous pieces of fashion. This was totally hot. And next up from the UK is Kitty Scott-Claus, who used her verse to sing about cheesy chips and cheesy where she said, if it ain't cheesy, I ain't going down easy. And I've got to give it to her. She had one of the funniest verses, both in terms of delivery of that comedy and also in the style of writing. And she sounded really good on the track. And generally speaking, so did her entire group, which, like, again, how is it that Kitty sounded like she was in a professional recording studio, but there were other girls that sounded like they were just singing to an empty gymnasium? Clock that T, mama. Clock that T. My ears clocked it, did yours? And to look at the mix as a whole, the actual Europop mix, which, by the way, I think was a little bit of favoritism that the producers chose to give the Europop mix to Kitty Scott-Claus, right? But that's a separate conversation. That's a separate conversation because that happened, okay? But the actual Europop mix, I think, was just, generally speaking, given a lot more love and sounded a lot fuller. So when the Queen's verses were added, it just sounded much more complete than those other two ever could have. But back to what just Kitty did. She did amazing in her verse. She nailed the choreo. She sounded good. And she wasn't just dancing on stage, but she was truly performing this and gave a show with her little, you know, mimings and the things that she did and the expressions that she gave. And she genuinely did a great job here. This was totally over on the runway. Miss Kitty's got choices. Miss Kitty's got some choices here because her concept for this runway is that she's just a girl, just a British girl who's trying on some clothes for a night out. She touched the fashion and it changed her life. Yes, it did. First look is reminiscent of that silhouette she did from last week with her Evil Queen look. It's pink, holographic, and interesting enough on its own. But this, I think, is the best of her 4 because this reveals into like a yellow rhinestone gown, which doesn't fit very well. And that reveals into like a blue glittery cocktail dress, which I don't like the silhouette of. And then that reveals into like a 4th orange or gold kind of shimmery asymmetrical dress. And overall, I was just kind of sitting there like eye rolling because the concept of I'm just trying on different outfits is, I think, lacking imagination when compared to what a lot of the other girls did tonight. I mean, seriously, I'm just gonna wear 4 of the most simple dresses I can find compared to, I'm gonna give you an entire Finding Nemo story on the runway. That's crazy. And this could have worked or been okay had all 4 of these looks been sickening pieces of fashion, but they're not. They're just giving Fashion Nova. So I'm gonna give this a and next up it's Varo, who in the challenge had one of my favorite verses, actually. And I'll say Spanish is a really beautiful language to sing and rhyme in. And I love how she not only used the Spanish language to her advantage, but also had such fun wordplay in it, rhyming papacito with despacito, necesito, infinito. And then finally, pajarito, referring to a man's special parrot downstairs. I will say though, she was maybe slightly weaker in her group in terms of choreo. And you can see that, for example, like at the very end of this group's number where they all turn around, she puts up her heart and she's the last one to do it. But really, this group was just solid across the board and they were all so in sync, mostly, much more than the other two. And Gala did a great job. This was muy caliente. And over on the runway, art history class is in session with Gala Varo giving us some Frida Kahlo realness for our nerves. Her first look is Frida on the cover of Vogue, which reveals to an interpretation of Frida's painting, The Two Fridas, where you can see that heart detail on the dress speaking to the connected heart lines of the two Fridas in the painting. And that final third look is referencing the broken back painting by Frida, which is depicting Frida's chronic pain she dealt with throughout her life, which by the way was not just from congenital defects, but also childhood polio and the tragic accidents she suffered. And I'm gonna say this was such a beautiful runway, an homage to such an iconic and truly once in a lifetime artist that I know everyone probably knows Frida Kahlo, but like, wow, what justice was done to her artistic beauty here on this runway tonight. Absolutely love everything she did here and the messaging behind it. This was totally hot. And last but not least, we've got Vanity Vane, who opens up her group's number with some of the most explicit lyrics we heard tonight that, as we know, I cannot repeat on this God-fearing Christian channel, but we'll just say her verse left her gagging on something very specific that rhymes with click. And this lyric, to I think nobody's surprise, got a big laugh out of Ru, and generally, I thought the judges were receiving what she was doing really well, which is why I was so surprised to ultimately see her in the bottom tonight, but we'll circle back on that in a second. Because I personally thought she did great in terms of group and solo choreo, and her lyrics were entertaining, some of the most entertaining of anyone's. There may be like some shots where you're like, yeah, maybe she could have been a little more in sync or something, but again, this group as a whole was so good and so much better than the other two groups that I did not understand the critiques on her tonight. And I'm gonna give this performance a hot. But over on the runway, she had a lot to say tonight, mama. She had 6 different looks. The first one, and by the way, she had a list that she pulled out of her hat to literally read off to the judges all the different flags that she was representing here. But the first one was the rainbow pride flag coat, which reveals to the pansexual flag, which reveals to the bisexual flag, which reveals to the trans flag dress, which was the best of all of her looks, which reveals to the non-binary flag, which reveals to the intersex flag. A lot. It was a lot. And look, I love the range of representation that she was able to capture in this crazy sequence of looks. But the problem was that like the majority of these looks were just not good standalone looks and were clearly just meant to be transitional pieces. But therein lies the issue, right? Because she's doing this on the Drag Race runway where the emphasis is more so on fashion and serving a silhouette. And so when you have these moments where the silhouette is lost or the shape is confusing, you're kind of like, what's happening? On top of the fact that it was just like, girl, sometimes enough is enough. Because out of her 6 looks, I would say the trans flag dress was a serve and the final intersex swimsuit moment was a serve. But the other 4, not for me. And so I do think the judges were right in giving her the critique. She needed to edit some of this down. But for the raw nerve and ambition and having a clear thematic connection between everything she was doing, and for 2 of the 6 looks being good, I'm gonna give this a safe hot. But before we talk actual placements, we've got to discuss that crazy drama from Untucked where we've got Nehellenia versus the world. And the setup for this big fight is the safe girls are all in Untucked discussing who they think is top and bottom this week. We hear Muse say that she thinks Nehellenia is in the bottom, and then we see Alyssa agree with her along with calling up Pythia and Miranda as bottom placements as well. We then see a cut to our tops and bottoms coming back from critiques, where Alyssa then informs Nehellenia that some queens pegged Nehellenia to be in the bottom this week, which is hilarious because we literally just heard Alyssa herself say that she thought Nehellenia was in the bottom, as well as so did Muse, but she wasn't gonna name names. Cue the drama. Nelly is of course offended hearing this, and she goes on to talk about how she's feeling a lack of love and respect for her drag from the rest of the cast, but doesn't call out any specific names in saying this. And then some of the girls in the room press Nehellenia for names of who she thinks is underestimating her. But when we pause right there and remember for just a second that everyone heard Alyssa and Soa say Nehellenia's name as bottom queens for this week, it's crazy to then hear the queens in that room who were there ask Nehellenia who she thinks is underestimating her. Because they know who's underestimating her, and they still ask. And then they have the nerve to act offended and like Nehellenia is causing drama simply by not naming any names of who she thinks is underestimating her. And like, girl, she can feel that type of way without actually knowing specifically who is. Like, that's very valid. But it's just crazy that they actually know who is but aren't telling her. And indeed, some of the queens who actually did name her as in the bottom this week possibly walk away from the conversation because they get frustrated she's speaking up. And look, I'm gonna pause here to say, we viewers saw reality TV, okay? We watched an edit of a TV show that could have felt and sounded very different to all the people in the room there. But I definitely feel here for Nehellenia, who's probably feeling a little bit gaslit by the rest of the cast. I get it. But at the same time, right, remember that this is reality television, so please don't take all this too seriously, and certainly do not go send any of these queens hate over this, because it's an Untucked fight, okay? It's not real. I mean, I'm sure it's a little real, but it's, it's not real. There are bigger problems. But that is the drama as we saw it. Poor Nehellenia. Poor sweet kind Nehellenia. I don't know though, let me know what y'all thought about all that in the comments below. And concerning placements, our top 3 tonight are called out to be Kitty Scott-Claus, Queen Kong, and Nehellenia. And I'll say judging solely on the individual segments that we saw from these 3 queens, I do generally agree with these tops. And the win here does ultimately go to Kitty, which because of how great her group did compared to everyone else's, and how great her individual performance was, I do agree. But it was these bottom placements and who ended up lip syncing that really shook me. Because our bottom 3 are Pythia, Vanity Vane, and Miranda Lebrao. And sure, based on the delivery of choreography, or lack thereof, Pythia and Miranda definitely fit the bill. But Vanity, being there in the bottom with them, I was like, why? For what? Especially after giving one of the funniest moments of the night, according to the judges. On top of the fact that Vanity's group literally did the best of the 3 groups. You know, it was like they felt the need to pick a bad queen from each group, but they didn't, because there really was nobody that was truly bad in that last group. And so singling Vanity Vane out here, I think, was only the result of them trying to come up with somebody to put in the bottom against Miranda, who could actually send her home. Because let's be honest and stand in our truth. If Pythia were to ultimately end up in a lip sync against Miranda, I don't know. I do actually think that Miranda would be here staying and we would be saying goodbye to Pythia. And so I'm looking at this from this critical eye and just coming to the conclusion that, yeah, the judges were basically doing anything they could here to make sure they had someone there who they knew was an excellent performer and who could lip sync for their lives and turn it out and send Miranda home. And the queen that fit the bill was Vanity Vane. Because I'll remind you, she already killed lip sync in the first episode when she won and did lip sync for the win. And based on the way they critiqued Miranda's bald looks last week, which were amazing, and then now seeing her again called out in the bottom, it was clear they just wanted to send her home no matter what. But that's just my 2 cents. I did react to this lip sync as well as the best parts of the episode over on my Patreon, so make sure to click the link below to catch that reaction, as well as future reactions of all the episodes I'll be reviewing. But my general analysis of this lip sync is that Vanity Vane deserved to win here. She was way more controlled in her performance and delivered a lip sync that made sense in this song, while Miranda was a little all over the place for me. The clown nose moments were fun, and some of the chaotic movements were fun, but it felt like she was just really desperately grabbing for straws and was losing control of her performance in this a little bit. And so I do think the judges made the right call by asking her to sashay away, but I also stand in my truth here and feel that this ultimately was a setup. And now for my final thoughts on this train wreck that is RuPaul's Drag Race Global All-Stars. So firstly, I've got to call out how the judges do not give any constructive criticism to queens who are just not delivering fashion, not delivering clear concept, like Kitty Scott-Claus and Queen Kong, who yes, are doing fine in the challenges, but on the runway, not delivering what the other queens are delivering. They're not. And the judges are just completely glossing over that. However, runways do seem to become this topic of critique and conversation and reason for bottom placements when it comes to progressing the narrative, like for queens such as Miranda Lebrao and maybe even Vanity Vane tonight, who again ended up in the bottom because why? And although some of the general top placements seem to be mostly fairly decided, I can't help but say that out of the side of my mouth because production is adding so many layers of help to some of these queens that are getting those top placements in areas such as audio engineering on their verses on these tracks. And look, I know it's RuPaul's Drag Race and favoritism is kind of the name of the game. It's her show. She's gonna crown who she wants, but I think we could at least do a little bit better. Like I think they do mostly in the main series seasons of not showing so much blatant production favoritism to their faves. That's all. But of course, I'd love to know what y'all thought about everything down in the comments below. And I want to remind y'all, seriously, my channel would not be possible without my patrons who support me every month with a pledge at patreon.com/BussyQueen. Please click the link below, subscribe to my Patreon, support this independent queen, and get tons of extra exclusive content for doing so, like reactions to this crazy train wreck of a season, Global All-Stars. And last, let's end with Hottest Hots. In the challenge, I've got to give it to Katie Scott-Claus, and on the runway, Pythia. And I also asked my patrons to vote on their Hottest Hots, and this week, we are 100% in sync, both in the challenge and the runway. And finally, I want to give an extra special shout out to Ashton, Felicia, Laura, Matthew Burns, Nicole, Meanst, and Will and Tana, who are all supporting me at my Bussy Queen Collector tier. See y'all later. Love ya. Bye.